Elon Musk has been floating all sorts of awful, terrible conspiracy theories about what happens at USAID.
Now, how are you going to review the spending in the federal budget without reviewing the spending? And that's what Mr. Musk is doing.
Donald Trump says, we don't care. You go die.
Now, thanks to Elon Musk and DOGE, they have uncovered one of the biggest fraud, waste, and abuse schemes within the federal government. Remember, President Trump promised to cut wasteful spending, and that's exactly what is happening here. But as a result, the Democrats do not know how to react to this. They're telling on themselves and confirming our suspicions. We're talking about USAID here, people. Now, before we get to the reaction of AOC and Chuck Schumer and the rest of the Democratic Party, let's first understand exactly what's going on here.
Now, USAID is, a very notorious. It's sort of a switch player. There's no aid in USAID, by the way. That's your brain is being tricked when you see the phrase USAID. It's not an aid organization. The aid in USAID stands for U.S. Agency for International Development. It is developing internationally around the world all of the institutions that the State Department needs to use. So when they are capacity building activist groups in a foreign country, that's because the State Department wants those activists there. Now, USAID, for the first time in its history, it was created in the early 1960s by JFK, 1961. It was created because you had all of this intelligence, statecraft, and military support and logistical aid that was tripping over itself, basically. The military would be funding, would be running aid to certain groups in the region. The State Department would be running aid to certain groups in the region. The intelligence community would, and there was no sort of central coordinator of those capacity building operations. So USAID, by the way, is a $50 billion budget. The entirety of the intelligence community is only $72 billion. So it is as more than the CIA and more than the State Department.
Wow.
And aid is basically USAID is effectively a switch player to assist the Pentagon with on the national security front, to assist the State Department on the national interest front, or to assist the intelligence community on a sort of clandestine operations front. So
now I want to play that clip because Mike Pence gets a lot of credit here. He's been on USAID's wasteful spending for many, many years now. So follow him on X if you don't do so. And also understand this, USAID is one piece to the overall wasteful spending of the federal government, but they're getting the most attention because not only is the amount atrocious, but what they're spending the money on has been atrocious. And we're going to get to that later in this video. Obviously, their funds are appropriated by Congress in the amount of $50 billion. But here's the problem. There's no oversight. There's nobody there auditing where every single dollar goes. And because President Trump made the promise to cut wasteful spending, how do you do that? You got to audit. But I want to start first with the meltdowns, because I think you're entertained by it. I'm entertained by it because it's coming from these people who they no longer have any control over the Democratic Party. They are in free fall at this point. And so let's get to Chuck Schumer and what he has to say about Elon Musk and DOGE after they have exposed this corruption.
Before our very eyes, an unelected shadow government is conducting a hostile takeover of the federal government. Friday night, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, led by billionaire Elon Musk, gained access to the Treasury Department's entire system of payments, including Social Security and Medicare benefits and Americans' tax refunds. I'll say more on this in a moment. But that was not all. This weekend, DOGE staffers also executed what can only be described as an illegal seizure of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. We don't know who these DOGE staffers are. We don't know if they have security clearances. We don't know what legal authority they have to access USAID facilities, if any. We also know this is just the beginning. If DOGE attacks USAID today, then you can be sure they'll move on to another target tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe it'll be the Postal Service, or the IRS, or even the Social Security Administration. They could be next. Or maybe our national security agencies.
Well, I do agree with Chuck Schumer on a couple of things. Maybe we should get rid of the IRS. I would hope that they would slash that. I mean, I'm sure we'd save a lot of money, and I think that would put more money in the pockets of everyday Americans, of course, but I'm sure that probably won't happen. Secondly, he's scared about Elon Musk and whether or not he has the security clearances, but he forgets to mention that it was Joe Biden that granted Elon Musk a top secret clearance in 2022. And thirdly, President Trump has the authority to obviously delegate to Elon Musk and DOGE, because it's part of the executive branch at this point, to go look up payments and figure out where every penny is going. And this level of outrage just shows you how complicit they are in this corruption. Now, here is Senator Kennedy explaining why what Elon Musk is doing is so important.
President Trump ran for office saying, I'm going to review every single penny in the federal budget. Now, how are you going to review the spending in the federal budget without reviewing the spending? And that's what Mr. Musk is doing. Now, many of my Democratic colleagues and some of the tofu-eating wokarati at the USAID are screaming like they're part of a prison riot because they don't want us reviewing the spending. But that's all Mr. Musk is doing, and he's finding some pretty interesting stuff. To my friends who are upset, I would say with respect, call somebody who cares. They better get used to this. It's USAID today. It's going to be Department of Education tomorrow. And really, here's what's going on. For 4 years under President Biden, the people in charge ask one simple question. Who needs to pay more in taxes? Who needs to pay more in taxes? Well, that's not the question that the Republicans and President Trump are going to ask. Our question is, what the hell happened to the money? And that's all that's going on.
Yeah, so the question that matters right now is, what have they been spending the money on? Well, according to DOGE, they put this up on their account. USAID spends $40 billion of taxpayer dollars to fund, quote, foreign aid. For an example, $45 million to DEI scholarships in Burma, $520 million for consultant-driven ESG investments in Africa, and $1.2 billion in awards to undisclosed recipients. And yesterday, the White House press secretary, Caroline, came out and also offered some examples of what USAID has been spending taxpayer dollars on.
And here's the reason why Elon Musk and others have been taking a look. Because if you look at the waste and abuse that has run through USAID over the past several years, these are some of the insane priorities that organization has been spending money on. $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. I don't know about you, but as an American taxpayer, I don't want my dollars going towards this crap, and I know the American people don't either, and that's exactly what Elon Musk has been tasked by President Trump to do, to get the fraud, waste, and abuse out of our federal government. Thank you, guys.
I agree. If American citizens actually knew where every single dollar was going, especially when it comes to USAID, they would come to the conclusion that it's pretty much a scam, okay? It's a front. It's not really being used majority of the time for legitimate foreign aid. Now, there are, and you can find certain programs within there that are actually doing great work. That may be 10% of it, but the rest of the 90% is fraud, waste, and abuse, and that's not even debatable. So instead of the Democratic Party focusing on the fraud, waste, and abuse like President Trump and the rest of the administration is doing, they're focused on attacking Elon Musk and calling him unintelligent.
This dude is probably one of the most unintelligent billionaires I have ever met or seen or witnessed. Which, you can probably even glean that from watching these people on TV. Anyways, all of that is to say is that they don't do their homework. Clearly, they're putting 19-year-olds in at the Treasury. This dude is not smart. And the danger in the lack of intelligence and the lack of expertise that Elon has. I mean, this guy is one of the most morally vacant, but also just least knowledgeable about these systems that we really know of. But the point is that what that means is that they're going to hit a button inevitably they are going to hit a button and things can go sideways.
Now, this continues to be the talking point, right? They make this extreme claim. He's going to hit a button and things are going to go sideways. And they always forget to mention that things have already gone sideways, right? It's like telling someone, hey, don't touch that because you're going to break it, but it's already broken. So how does that work exactly? That's what's going on with USAID, and particularly overall with the federal government as it pertains to their spending. It's fraud, waste, and abuse. When I served in the military, we used to get a training on fraud, waste, and abuse. And you know what was so funny about all that? We still committed fraud, waste, and abuse because the government, they can't help it. It's a habit. Now, it became so bad that President Trump had to appoint Secretary of State Marco Rubio as the acting administrator of USAID. And here's what he had to say about what's going on.
You're now the head of USAID. The head of DOGE, Elon Musk, called USAID a criminal organization and added that it is time for it to die. Do you agree with that?
They have basically evolved into an agency that believes that they're not even a U.S. government agency, that they are a global charity, that they take the taxpayer money and they spend it as a global charity, irrespective of whether it is in the national interest or not in the national interest. One of the most common complaints you will get if you go to embassies around the world from State Department officials and ambassadors and the like is USAID is not only not cooperative, they undermine the work that we're doing in that country. They are supporting programs that upset the host government for whom we're trying to work with on a broader scale and so forth. This is not about getting rid of foreign aid. There are things that we do through USAID that we should continue to do that makes sense. And we'll have to decide, is that better through the State Department or is that better through something, a reformed USAID? That's the process we're working through. There are things that are happening at USAID that we should not be involved in funding or that we have a lot of questions about, but they're completely uncooperative. So we had no choice but to take dramatic steps to bring this thing under control.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is why the Democratic Party and pundits on the news and the left-wing media is continuing to try to distract you from what's going on here. And how are they doing that? They're trying to tug on your heartstrings and give you the worst case scenario in all of this. And they don't want you focused on where the money is going. They want you to focus on, well, what if they cut this particular program and it causes this ripple effect? And that might be true, but it's also true that there is massive fraud, waste, and abuse in this agency, and it needs to be addressed in some very extreme ways because you guys don't want to cooperate. Now, let me show you an example of how they're using this narrative to tug on your heartstrings. Here's Van Jones on CNN.
We can brag on Marco Rubio. I'd be happy to do it, but I'm going to tell you right now, people are going to die in very large numbers around the world who are expecting the United States to live up to our promises to get them medicine, to get them help. And when that happens, people are going to remember that. There are people right now who have HIV who are alive only because the United States is making sure of that. Donald Trump says, we don't care. You go die. That's the message from the United States government. It is the wrong message to be sending, and it opens up the door for China and other people say, at least we're a stable government who's not going to leave you out here to die. That's this is not an abstract conversation for people around the world.
You know what? Let's take Van Jones at his word. Let's say he is right about all that. Then why did the AP publish this story on February 2nd? Breaking. USAID security chiefs placed on leave after they refused to turn over classified material to Elon Musk's government inspection teams. So if you are doing good work and you're saving lives, wouldn't you turn over the documents to prove that? Wouldn't you stand up for what you believe? Wouldn't you provide the receipts to say, hey, we are doing the right thing here? Or would you not do it because you know there's massive corruption here, which is why Matt Gaetz said this. Imagine still believing that USAID is about delivering aid after reading this. But again, this is their response to it. AOC, if you want to start with waste, start with Elon's defense contracts at the Pentagon. In fact, we should start with transparency around defense contracts in general, which take up an enormous sum of public funds, but they won't do that, will they? Well, what she doesn't understand is Elon Musk and SpaceX does not make up the bulk of defense contracts. In fact, it's actually a small minority. Now, if you want to go after Lockheed Martin and Boeing, that makes sense, and that's a legitimate criticism. But again, she misses on this. Now, here's Scott Jennings providing more common sense on this debate.
Republican who worked in the White House for President Bush when PEPFAR was passed.
Yes.
I think it's one of the most successful things for American soft power we've ever done. I think George W. Bush may have saved more human lives than any other president. This is an example of a positive use of American soft power. But there is a difference between soft power and stupid spending. And there is a long list of things today, as the Congresswoman pointed out, that all Americans would regard as stupid and not in line with any U.S. interest. And let me say one more thing.
I'm not denying
the
that.
USAID bureaucracy.
How you do it, Scott?
Yes, let me
Are you
finish.
going to just shut down a whole agency, or are you going to find the waste and stop it?
The USAID bureaucracy is not American soft power. It's the money and the strategic direction. Today, he put Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, our Chief Foreign Policy Officer, in charge of USAID. Soft power will not stop. But out of control bureaucracy will stop, and that will help us.
Bill Cassidy says that it's stopped.
Okay, so the problem with Democrats and the people who oppose what Elon Musk and Trump is doing in regards to this entire debate is that they are missing out on common sense. If you hand someone $50 billion and there is zero audits and no follow-up and no accountability, what do you think they're going to do with the money? They're going to waste it. It's human behavior. I find that fascinating, but wait a minute. They'll come and audit you and me. They want to know when we spent more than $600. They want to make sure that we pay our tax dollars, but they don't want us looking into what USAID is doing. Now, you tell me if that makes sense or not. Now, if you need more evidence to see how deep this wasteful spending goes, the National Desk, they have a YouTube channel. They published a story showing how the Government Accountability Office has exposed the amount of payments that are improper, fraudulent, wrong amount, or have gone to the wrong recipient. Hear it for yourself.
Billions blown on improper payments. The Government Accountability Office's latest report shows the federal government issued $161.5 billion in payments in fiscal year 2024 that should not have been made or that were made at an incorrect amount.
I put the fault at Congress here. It's not really cracking down and doing what it needs to do to reduce these erroneous and fraudulent payments.
Since 2003, these improper payments have piled up to a total of $2.8 trillion. However, experts think it could be more since some federal agencies are not complying with guidelines mandated in the Payment Integrity Information Act of 2019.
Now, after looking at those numbers and really doing your research, I'm sure you're left wondering, why is the Democratic Party fighting this? Why do they believe it's smart to go down to the USAID federal office in D.C. and protest what Elon Musk and DOGE is doing? I don't know. I think they're continuing to double down on strategies that will make sure that they lose future elections. Now, let me show you the first protest. This is from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who herself and her country that she comes from has already received over $1 billion from USAID, but I guess that's another thing. Here's what she had to say.
I am exceptionally upset about USAID. I lived in a refugee camp for 4 years as a child surviving civil war. It is the essential programs that USAID provided that kept my family and I fed and safe. It is the resources that so many people around the world rely on. And it is our soft power. Oftentimes, people interact with our country through the military. That does not create love for us, and it certainly does not keep us safe. When the world interacts with Americans through programs that provide essential need, they get to see the heart and compassion of the American people. When someone is struggling because their bridge broke down, when USAID comes in and helps fix that bridge, that creates goodwill for the American people. When people are dying of malaria and there is medication through USAID, that creates goodwill for the American people. When people are fleeing and they need just a little bit of food and USAID is there to provide that, that creates goodwill for the American people.
All right, well, listen, there's two things. One, she's right. Some of the aid definitely helps people. I don't think anybody's disputing that. But according to the numbers, that only represents the minority of the $50 billion budget. So what's happening with the majority of our tax dollars? That's the issue here. Now, this is why some people believe that the agency should just be shut down and a new one should start. That way we know for a fact that the money is being spent in the way that we want it to. But remember, what did I tell you at the beginning of this video? The Democratic playbook is to focus on your emotions, which is exactly what Congressman Chris Murphy did when he also gave a speech during that protest.
So Elon Musk has been floating all sorts of awful, terrible conspiracy theories about what happens at USAID. Let's make it very clear that every single day, America is safer because of what happens at USAID. USAID fights terrorist groups all across this world, making sure that we address the underlying causes for a retreat to terrorism. USAID chases China all around the world, making sure that China doesn't monopolize contracts for critical minerals and port infrastructure all around the world. It supports freedom fighters everywhere in this world. Up until yesterday, delivering firewood, for instance, to the brave Ukrainian defenders on the Eastern Front.
So if USAID, okay, let's take what he's saying as a fact. That means they've been failing because last time we checked, China seized control of the Panama Canal, which is what caused President Trump to do what he did in order to get the president of Panama to rip up that contract between that country and China. So explain that one, Congressman Murphy. And of course, now you have Bill Gates making his rounds on the news to defend USAID. And if that is happening, I think that tells you everything you need to know.
A lot of private sector people, when they get into government, they don't take the time necessarily to see what the good work is or why it's structured the way it is. So I'm a little worried, particularly with this USAID stuff. My foundation partners with USAID on nutrition and getting vaccines out. And, there's incredible people. They're not actually worms that work there. So, hopefully we'll get some of that work back in shape. In fact, if we don't, you could have literally millions of deaths. So, with aid, people think, wow, how much do we give to these countries? As you said, it's less than 1%. People think it's 5% and it should be 2%, but it's actually under 1%.
Wow. And still saving lives.
Well, my reaction to this is very simple. Number one, it's in Bill Gates' financial interest to make sure that USAID is continuing to move forward. He said it out loud, people, in case you didn't hear it. Number two, we've already talked about it throughout this video. We know two things can be true at the same time, that there are good programs within USAID. And Marco Rubio said, hey, we're not going to scrap the whole thing. We need to reform it because majority of it is fraud, waste, and abuse. Which brings me to number three. The American people don't care to hear what Bill Gates has to say. They don't care what the Democratic Party has to say anymore because Joe Biden did everybody a favor. He proved that the Democratic Party has been lying up and down about everything. So at this point, we don't believe anything. Show us what the numbers are saying, and then we will make a determination about what should happen moving forward. That's exactly what President Trump is doing.
The biggest freak out on the left now seems to be about USAID. The Democrats, I'll go through examples. Senator Eric Schmidt put out $20 million on a Sesame Street show in Iraq. $56 million to boost Egyptian, Tunisian tourism, $40 million to build schools in Jordan. We'll tell more people about it more. Why would we be spending hard-earned American taxpayer dollars on items like that and more?
Because Washington, D.C. for far too long has been run by corrupt government bureaucrats who do not care about hard-earned tax dollars that the American people are working for every single day. And finally, it took President Trump and Elon Musk, who is serving as a great friend and ally to the president, to start digging through the books of this bloated bureaucracy here in Washington. And the waste, the fraud, the abuse is alarming.
Well, she's spot on, but here's the question that the media continues to ask President Trump is, who gave Elon the authority to do this? Who is Elon Musk to get access to do this? Right? All they do is question everything that Trump is doing, including Elon Musk. And you know what they're not doing? Questioning what happened to American tax-paying dollars. They don't want to talk about that for some reason. But here's President Trump responding to that very question.
Well, he's got access only to letting people go that he thinks are no good if we agree with him, and it's only if we agree with him. He's a very talented guy from the standpoint of management and costs, and we put him in charge of seeing what he can do with certain groups and certain numbers. Some of the numbers are horrible, what he's found. Think of it, $100 million on condoms to Hamas, and many other things that are frankly even more ridiculous. And they're finding tremendous waste. It's something that he feels very strongly about, and I'm impressed because he's running obviously a big company. It has nothing to do, if there's a conflict, that we won't let him get near it. But he does have a good natural instinct. He's got a team of very talented people. We're trying to shrink government, and he can probably shrink it as well as anybody else, if not better.
All right, given everything we covered in this video, where are you on this issue? Do you believe that President Trump, given the authority to Elon Musk to see where every dollar is going of taxpayer money, is the wrong thing to do? Do you believe this feeds into the idea that we have reached a point of oligarchy and billionaires are seizing control of the federal government? Or are you of the person that says, hey, you know what? This is exactly what is needed because the federal government for so long have been addicted to fraud, waste, and abuse. Speaking of abuse, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, who resigned but hasn't found a replacement yet, came out and finally bent the knee to President Trump and his demands in regards to tariffs. Now, there's so many details about how complicit Canada is when it comes to the drugs pouring over our country that the media doesn't want to talk about, but you're definitely going to want to hear it for yourself. So if you want to check out that video and more stories from last night, all you have to do is click on that video because it's coming up right now.